Thank you so much. We're honored to have former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo with us, and thank you, Secretary, for sitting with us.
Great to be with you all.
We are talking about the consequences of conflict, and certainly we have many conflicts across the world to discuss. I was honored to be at this conference 7 years ago, the first one in Riyadh, and I was honored to be able to sit with His Royal Highness, MBS. Things have changed quite a bit across the world since then, haven't they?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me here. It's wonderful to be back at FII. And it's an important time to be here, too. The world is a much more unstable place today than it was 4 or 5 years ago. We see that in the conflicts. There's been talk about these 2 wars that are going on. I'm sure we'll talk about it as well. But in the economic sphere, the connectivity between things that are happening geopolitically is now ever more closely tied to thinking about investments, thinking about commerce, thinking about capital flows than I think it has, maybe not ever, but in an awfully long time. Today, it is impossible to separate geopolitical risk from capital allocation.
And we've seen an incredible amount of aggression, particularly coming from communist China, on the world, certainly in America, against America in the last 3 years. And I want to get your take there because we're beginning here with an investment outlook. We've got an investor audience, pools of capital, and some of those ideas in terms of allocating that capital zero in on China. There are countless numbers of Chinese companies right now that trade on U.S. exchanges, the New York Stock Exchange, the NASDAQ. Some of those companies have already been sanctioned, and yet investors across the world are investing in them. Isn't that funding the expansion of the free world's number one adversary?
I think there's no doubt about that. I think the way that the West has handled this risk associated with the Chinese Communist Party's military, in particular, the People's Liberation Army, has misunderstood the central nature of the relationship between the Chinese Communist Party and Chinese businesses. And I think we can all see it. Any of you who have done significant business in China can see. Your counterparts, whether they say it out loud or not, they're concerned too. They're trying to get their money out. They are more concerned about their own personal security. Xi Jinping has fundamentally made a decision to value power over economic growth and military expansion and political expansion over economic growth. And that's something that Western markets have to take into account. In the end, it will take governments that steer businesses in the right direction. I remember the controversies around the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, where there was lots of bad stuff taking place, and CEOs saying, well, I can't do anything because this is just how the world works. And once the rule gets in place, we all are able to conform to that. We're going to have to do the same thing with this challenge from the Chinese Communist Party. We no longer have even remotely reciprocity between American markets, Western markets, New York Stock Exchange, the London Stock Exchange, and how American companies are treated inside of China. That central idea of reciprocity, I think, is important because the Chinese Communist Party has been at war with the Western world for 30 years. People ask Mike, are we going to go to war with China? I would argue they have been at war with us, with the idea of human dignity, with the idea of economic property rights, with these central understandings that we all take for granted in the West. And they have been trying to undermine it and are working diligently towards that. And if we adopt the model that we did for the last 50 or 60 years, we will have our children and grandchildren living in a very different place. I get it. China's economy has all kinds of challenges. They are not 10 feet tall. This problem is absolutely solvable. But we should not underestimate Xi Jinping in particular and his resolve to have us live in a world that looks more like their world than the world that I think everyone in this room wants to live in.
And I'd like you to really assess the threat specifically about what's going on there. I know you've been traveling the world. You're just back from the Middle East, and I want to hear about that, and I know our audience does. But let's stay on China for a moment, because putting COVID aside, leaking out of a lab, likely, there was a cover-up in terms of how severe COVID was. There was surveillance balloons flying above U.S. military installations, intellectual property theft, fentanyl coming through the border. Now there's an increasing number of Chinese nationals coming into America through the open border. What's going on? How would you assess the threat of communist China today?
When I think about it as a former American official, I always thought about all the challenges that China presents, militarizing ports around the world, their Belt and Road Initiative, not the commercial aspects of it, but the political aspects of it. The challenges in the Taiwan Strait, these were all things that we spent time on. But I must say, the thing that disturbs me the most is that the Chinese Communist Party is inside the gates, inside the United States of America. And it is true for European countries, it is true for Middle Eastern countries as well. They are diligently working to shape the information space for the next generation and doing so incredibly effectively. We were talking about this earlier. When I was a Secretary of State, we shut down what I believe was the largest spy operation ever in America. It was being run out of the Chinese consulate in Houston, Texas. They were stealing secrets from, those of you in the energy world know, from the woodlands down to the ports of Houston, that entire energy corridor. We were talking earlier about the University of Texas. They were stealing secrets from the University of Texas medical system at a scale that was absolutely epic. And we'd known about it for a long time and just didn't do anything. And in the end, I convinced my former boss that it was the right thing to do to take that risk down for American businesses and for American families. They are operating inside of our country. They take advantage of our freedoms, and I wouldn't want to change a thing about that, but we have to take seriously the fact that today the information space and the work that they're doing, going to school board meetings, I mean, this is crazy stuff, impacting governors, state legislators, they've got people running for city council. I mean, this is serious at-scale activity inside of our own country, and it's true in other nations as well.
So what do you want to say to the investors of the world in terms of investing in some of these companies that are so closely tied to the leadership of Communist China? I don't think there's much difference. Once you're a Chinese company, you're forced to give up your information, right? And I think you've mentioned in the past, it's not about talking about those companies making keychains and beach balls, et cetera. It's much bigger than that.
Yeah. No, look, there's lots of things that are, I'm a free trade guy. There's lots of things where I think we should trade. But when it comes to things that really matter, critical infrastructure, things that will protect your kids when they're serving in the military, those are things that we have to use great caution about. I'll give one other thought in terms of as you think about investing. You know, two thoughts actually. One is I hear some nations say, look, that's your fight, America. You guys I don't want to pick sides as between China and the United States. I think that fundamentally misunderstands the problem set. This is not about picking sides between the United States and China. This is about picking sides between two economic models, right? These are vastly different models for how we talk about impact on humanity. These are drastically different models for how we're going to impact humanity. If anybody thinks that the Chinese Communist Party is going to abide by any environmental commitment they have ever made, I want to see you afterwards because I'll make some money trading against you. They're just not going to do it. The second thing I think we should think about in terms of capital allocation is this. You know, there are members of the American political class that talk about decoupling, how we're going to just decouple these economies. In the earlier panel, there was talk about onshoring and friendshoring and all of that. Fine. I think every company should think about their supply chain and how to balance risk. I think that's important. But the risk of decoupling doesn't come from the West. The person who will deliver decoupling is Xi Jinping. The person who's actually going to disconnect, once he has an economy and his technology and his institutions, his academic institutions, at a level where he believes he has a sustainable model, it will be Xi Jinping that makes the decision to disconnect. He'll steal the American stuff, he'll steal the Western property, and then he will decouple these two economies. And that is really bad for the global economy.
Which is why there is a rising worry about the number of Chinese nationals coming through the border into America. Let's do a final point on this China conversation, then I want to move on to the Middle East. What is that about in your view, and is this a prelude to the potential invasion of Taiwan by the CCP?
You know, I don't know if they're connected. I worry greatly about the fact that we don't have control of who's coming in and out of our country. I was in Kyiv. Right, when you talk about sovereignty and borders, and you're sitting in Kyiv and you're watching the news saying that we don't have control over our borders and our own sovereignty, when I was a CI director, I saw the things that were coming across our border. We managed to make it much better during our time, and now it is literally Katie bar the door, essentially wide open at America's southern border. And I've seen the reporting of now thousands and thousands of Chinese nationals coming across the border. I think everyone in this room knows no one travels from China without the Chinese government knowledge of where they're going, what they're going to do when they get there, who they're going to go see, and the capacity to track them wherever they may go. And so the fact that you now see these large numbers showing up there suggests to me that our FBI is going to be really busy figuring out how to monitor and maintain security for the United States and figuring out who these people are and how many of them are truly just economic migrants and how many of them were brought to the United States for some purpose that is much more nefarious than just someone wanting to live a better life.
Do you expect China to invade Taiwan anytime soon?
In the classic sense of the word invasion, I don't. I disagree with some of my former Republican colleagues.
Is it a soft invasion
Yeah,
like we saw in Hong Kong?
by the way, it's taking place. No, it'll look like Hong Kong. I mean, if you ask, it's already happening. They fly every day. They're exhausting the Taiwanese Air Force by just flying sorties that they have to go counter. There's enormous work to impact the Taiwanese election. They were unsuccessful at getting their candidate elected these past months. But they won't. That will just be a speed bump on the way to what their ultimate objective is, which is political control. And so you can imagine fishing fleets causing more problems, lots of pressure, pressuring countries around the world to step away from defending Taiwan. And I have seen how this goes, the war games. They all end up badly. They end up badly for, if you think our stock markets are volatile today, the moment you start to see Chinese military start to move to their eastern shores, you will see volatility that is of a scale we haven't seen maybe since 2008. Every time, the assets that sit on the island of Taiwan, everybody knows them, are impacted nearly immediately. The Japanese are forced to get involved very quickly, and the global economy suffers in, a couple of weeks, not a couple of months.
You were the director of the CIA, you were the congressman from Kansas, and at that time you were studying China. You really began the investigation into the threat of communist China, and then of course you served as Secretary of State, at which time you came up with the Abraham Accords, which was celebrated by many in the Middle East, with the exception of Iran. Let's talk about the threat from Iran, as the Houthis and other proxies of Iran have been attacking the U.S.'s troops as well as others, and of course, Hamas's invasion and attacking Israel. How do you see things there?
So two thoughts. One, I didn't invent the Abraham Accords. Happy to take credit, but don't deserve it. Lots of teams. Secretary Mnuchin, who was just on, Jared, who's here, a big team, a group of leaders in the Middle East, including the Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia, all made that come together. But it did happen as a result of a central thesis that we had, which was that the malign actor in the region is the Islamic Republic of Iran, and we have to take away every capacity that they have to create risk. You should know I'm hopelessly biased. They are still trying to kill me. If you see me walking around a security team, it's not because I enjoy it, but because I still need it. And I think that's telling. These are people who will stop at nothing to a group of people who are simply trying to live their lives, right? In the same way we are here in the United States, you can see the Islamic Republic's hand in what happened in Gaza, right? They supported, funded, essentially facilitated the capacity for Hamas to do the barbaric attacks that took place on October 7th. Today, without the Iranian support, you'd still have Maersk shipping through the Red Sea instead of having to move their transit some other way, because you've got missiles being launched into the Red Sea with relatively good accuracy. Nearly all the instability that takes place in the Middle East is a direct result of that regime in Iran. And the United States has to lead in deterring them. And we've lost that. We've lost that deterrence. We started to lose it in the Trump administration by 2019 when the Iranians flew ballistic missiles into Abqaiq to a Saudi Aramco facility. The Saudis here will all remember that very well. The oil markets stayed relatively calm because Aramco did amazing work to keep the pipelines to the east open. But we were starting to lose deterrence as well, and we had to go get it back. And we did it with the strike on Soleimani, demonstrating that we would impose costs on the regime. And to the extent the Biden administration and the European leadership aren't prepared to impose costs on Iran or the IRGC, their external terror force, they are going to do, what's the best way to describe it? Everybody remember the old Southwest Airlines jingle? Feel free to move about the cabin. Like, the Iranians today feel free to move around the cabin. We permitted them for 3 years to fire rockets out of Yemen into southern Saudi Arabia, and we did nothing. And that was a precursor to what I think you're seeing today.
So what would be the proper deterrence? You've talked a lot about deterrence and the lack of deterrence right now. How do you stop Iran?
Oh, goodness. Look, the first thing you have to do is you have to be serious about taking their crude oil off the market. We had them down to something under 500,000 barrels a day being shipped illicitly. I think they're now shipping, someone in the room will know the number better than me, 3.5 to 4 million barrels a day. That's their wealth engine. That's the IRGC's wealth creation engine. To the extent they have more money, they'll fund Hezbollah, they'll fund the Houthis, they'll create all the chaos that we're seeing today. So that's step one. You've got to go back to a model that tries to deny their wealth. They had about $4 billion. The Iranian regime had about $4 billion of foreign exchange reserves on January 20th of 2021. And today they have somewhere between $25 and $30 billion worth of forex. They are flush. Their economy grew more quickly last year than did the American economy. I mean, that's bad policy, and we can impact it. And then second, you have to demonstrate your willingness to impose costs on the regime, not just on the proxies. If they kill 3 Americans, as they did, and your response is to go fire some missiles into Iraq, you're going to fuel this problem. If they launch an attack by Hamas into Israel, and within a handful of weeks you are telling the Israelis to slow things down, the Iranians will see that too. They'll see that absence of resolve. And so deterrence is really simple. You create a perception in the mind of your adversary that the cost is greater than the benefit. And it is not easy to do, and it is always temporary. But there are so many things that the United States and, frankly, the Gulf states and Europe can do to convince the Iranians not to behave in the way they're behaving. You simply have to have the resolve to get to the right outcome. It's not just about kinetic targeting. It's not like, Mike, what would the right target be to get that deterrence back? It's so much bigger than that. It is economic in the first instance. There are lots of tools that intelligence services have. There are many things one can do to convince the Iranians that it is not in their best interest to continue their terror campaign.
Can Israel win this?
Yeah, sure. In the sense of, will they establish a security belt that is sufficient for them? Absolutely. But I'll say this. It's not about Israel winning so much as it is about us. It's about those of us who believe in these fundamental ideas of nations who aren't terror regimes prevailing. We have to demonstrate that we're prepared to do victory, not just fight things to a draw. And so it will take all of us to begin to deliver that. And maybe this is the place to end this conversation in the Middle East. The Abraham Accords were a direct corollary to the fact that the United States and Israel were tied at the hip. We knew they were good security partners. We knew Iran was bad, and we knew that the Gulf states wanted to get to a place where their central foreign policy theme wasn't Israel bad. They knew that they were an important economic partner. They had understood that, and we ended up having the right leaders in place to be able to deliver 4 nations to sign peace agreements with Israel. And what that led to, most importantly, was more stability and more prosperity for the region. And that's the model one has to get back to, and that means identifying the problem, which is in fact coming from Tehran.
And then there's Russia, which we know has been supported by China and Iran. A word on Russia and its attacks.
Yeah, these aren't, we talk about them in silos. These are all deeply connected. The Russians are getting weapons from the Iranians. The Russians are selling crude oil into an energy-starved China. Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin describe themselves as, what would my daughter-in-law say, BFFs. This is, by the way, this is not new in history. You can go back civilizational history. You can certainly go back to the pre-World War II era. Bad actors congregate around each other. In the end, the Russians have friends in North Korea, they have friends in China, they have friends in Venezuela, and they have friends in Iran. And frankly, everybody else is just a victim, right? So might do business with them because they feel compelled to. We have to make sure that all of us, whether it's the United States and Europe, all of the economies, the powerful economies of the Middle East, India, Southeast Asia, all of these places, tie our economies together with a construct that convinces China in particular, and Russia one day too, that they want to be part of that business model. They want to be part of that economic ecosystem which will deliver better outcomes for them. Whatever their goals are, political security for themselves as leaders or better lives for their own people, being part of that Western economic model is the right place to be. Just have to be serious about protecting it.
So as we wrap up, from an investment standpoint, the pools of capital in the room today, what would you say are the leading threats to the free world today on a geopolitical
Yeah.
angle?
Goodness. I think we've gone through them. The thing we have to deliver is a prosperity model, a stability model of like-minded nations. They're all going to have governments that are different. They're not all going to be democracies, but governments who have a shared understanding that trade is good, property rights matter, the rule of law is critical. This is how you get foreign direct investment, right? The first panel talked about you have to have welcoming places for capital. We need to demonstrate through our good work and the regulatory environments that we put in place that we are the right place to do the next generation of AI. And we are the right places to do, but to trade in currencies that are ours and not theirs. Those are the building blocks of geopolitical security. And if we get those right, we can have another 70 years that look like the post-World War II, which didn't have peace everywhere. But if you look at the growth of humanity across those 70 years, it delivered a really good outcome. We have to preserve that for the next 70 years, that our children, grandchildren won't live in an economic model that looks like tyranny and the absence of freedom. It is entirely possible to do.
How are the investors of the world able to participate in that positive outcome?
You know, this falls, the world does move fast. Some of these things that we've been talking about, we were a lot of conversation about AI, I know there'll be more. Some of these things actually precede the state. They precede governments. That is, they move, and they move really fast. I am not optimistic about regulating some of these technologies. I actually think let 1,000 flowers bloom. We have a set of rules to punish people who break the law. To try and contain such a thing that will create enormous productivity and flourishing is an enormous mistake. And so as investors, as you think about, hey, how are you going to decide where it is one ought to apply capital, you should apply it against a model that will get you the highest politically adjusted IRR. And I think that's now more important than ever. Leave to governments doing politics, but make no mistake that politics will come find you as well. Geopolitics will come find you as well. I can't tell you how many American CEOs came into my office when I was a Secretary of State to tell me horror stories about what happened to them inside of China. They didn't want them to be public. They didn't want the stories known, but massive risk sitting on their balance sheets. And they were trying to figure their way to reduce that risk profile. And I would just encourage everyone to make sure that as you think about your investments and your balance sheet, to make sure that you get that risk profile right, given all of the various risks that sit on top of us today.
Secretary, final question. This is a year of many elections across the world. I ask you about the U.S. election. Can you give us your expectation on how it plays out and whether or not the United States can get back to its leadership position in the world?
I'll answer the second one. How about that? I hope that America can be part of working with all the international folks that are here today to leading. We're gonna have a crazy 6 or 7 months in the American political system. I think that is a certainty. If you made me guess today, I think that former President Trump's most likely to prevail. That's not a particularly original thought, but I think given the place that the United States finds itself today, I think the American people are going to be looking for a change, and I think that means that the Republican nominee, who is certain to be President Trump, is probably going to be the victor.
Sir, thank you.
Thank you, Maria.
Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, thank you.